In this video, we're going to speak about the indirect function and how we can use it to create dynamic references or addresses. So what does the indirect function do? What it does is that it returns the reference or the address specified by a text. So you give it a text, and if that text contains a valid address, it will go to that address and bring you the contents of that address. And we will see that shortly with an example. So this address that you give to it can be a table or a cell or a named range or a sheet or a workbook. And then there is another argument here, which is the address style, and this argument is an optional argument, and this can have a value of A1 or R1, C1. The default is A1, which is what we would usually do, because A1 and R1, C1 are the two ways of referring to cells in Excel, but actually the R1, C1 method is obsolete. It's not used anymore by most of the Excel professionals. So actually we would use the A1, and the A1 style is the default one. So you actually, in most of the cases, will not need to deal with this address style input. You can even ignore it and it will have a default value of A1 and everything would work just fine. Okay, so let's have an example here for the indirect function. So if I write equals indirect and then I put the reference text, so we have the first input here is the reference text, which is actually the address that we're going to supply to the indirect function. If I put that as cell A5, and then the second input is actually the style for our address or reference, is it R1 C1 style or is it A1 style, and this is an optional argument or an optional input that defaults to the A1 style, so we don't even have to deal with it because we actually want the A1 style, so we can just ignore it. And if we press enter, what do we get? We get Mercedes. So why did we get Mercedes? Well, we gave the indirect function the value that is inside cell A5. So what's the value that was inside cell A5? It's H5. And what is H5? It's actually a valid address. So H5 is a text, and this text is a valid address. So the indirect function will take that valid address and go to it. Here it's cell H5 here, and then it will return what was in that valid address. So it's returned Mercedes here. So what if I delete this H5 inside A5? Let's try that. So I'll delete it here, press delete on my keyboard. As you can see here, we get a reference error. Why did we get a reference error? The reason for that is that the indirect function went to cell A5, it checked what was inside cell A5, and it was an empty string or an empty text. So that is not a valid address, so it got confused, it gave you a reference error. It doesn't know where to get a value from, because this is not a valid address. You just gave it an empty string. So I'll press Ctrl and Z here on my keyboard to return the value H5 here again inside A5. And now let's write the indirect function again here. So equals indirect, and then our reference here is going to be cell A6, which contains the word car. And if I press enter, we get the value Mercedes as well. So why did I get the value Mercedes? Well, if we look at the cell containing Mercedes here, which is cell H5, you can see here that it's also a named range that is called car. And we could also check that on the formulas tab on the ribbon. Name manager, you can see here, this is a named range. Car is a named range, and it's referring to cell H5. So it's returned Mercedes here in this case because car is a valid named range that refers to cell H5. So this is why it's returned the contents of cell H5. But if I write bike here, and if I press enter, you can see here it's returned a ref error. This is because bike is not a valid address. I don't have a range called bike. So this is why it was confused. It doesn't know what bike would refer to. So it gave us an error. So I'll press Ctrl and Z here on my keyboard. So in the past two examples here, in these two examples, I gave it the reference inside a cell or the address inside a cell. I can actually give indirect the reference directly as well. So equals indirect, and then I can give it cell H5 here as a reference. And if I press enter, I get Mercedes. Remember when we said that the reference should be a text. So here I am giving it a text. I'm giving it a text because I'm putting it between double quotes, right? In Excel, if you need to make something a text inside a formula, then you need to put it between double quotes. Well, this is what I did. I put it between double quotes, so I gave it the address as a text this way as well. So these are two different ways to give it the address as a text. You can either give it to it as a text inside a cell and refer to that cell just like we did here, or you can give it the text directly here, H5. And I can do that as well with car. So equals indirect and then car, and press enter, and as you can see here I get Mercedes as well. So that's another way of referring to the address and giving the indirect the address as a text. But what if I change this H5 here and I remove the double quotes from it and I just give indirect H5? If I press enter, I will get an error. So why do I get an error? It's because indirect is going to go to cell H5. It's going to find the text Mercedes, and Mercedes is not a valid address. It's not a range, right? So this is why Mercedes will not lead the indirect function to anywhere. It's not a valid address. I don't have a named range called Mercedes. If I had a named range called Mercedes, then this would return the cell that is named Mercedes, that has the name Mercedes. So this is how you can use the indirect function when dealing with cell references and named ranges. Okay, so let's see how we can use the indirect function with another type of references, which is table references. And let's see how we can use it to generate dynamic table references. So let's say I've got two tables here, two data tables. I've got this data table that contains the sales for 2017. It's in the sheet sales 2017 and its name is TBL 2017. And I've got another table here that is named TBL 2018 in the sheet sales 2018. And let's say I want to get the total sales for product 1, product 2, and product 3 for the particular year that I select from this drop-down menu. So if I select 2017, I get the sales for 2017, and if I select 2018, I get the sales for 2018. So the usual way that we would get the sales is using the SUMIFS function. So equals SUMIFS, and then let's say I want to get the sales for 2017, so I'm going to go here to the sheet for 2017, and the first argument here for my SUMIFS function is the sum range, and the sum range is going to be the column for the sales amount. And notice here it's giving me table references instead of cell references. This is because I'm referring to a table. And then the criteria range 1 is going to be the column containing the year, right? So this is the column for my first criterion, and then criteria 1 is going to be actually the year 2017. I'm going to absolute that because I'm going to refer to this cell as I'm dragging the formula down, so I need to absolute it. And then criteria range 2 is going to be the column containing the product name, right? And then criteria 2 is going to be the product name. I'm going to close brackets here and press enter, and then if I drag this formula down, you can see here I get the total sales for product 1 in 2017, 370,995. Let's check the number here. So if I highlight the sales for 2017 for product 1 here, you can see here is 370,995. So I'm getting the correct number. Now, let's say I want to select 2018 from this drop-down menu and get the sales for 2018. Right now, this is not the case because this formula is not dynamic and it only gets me the sales for 2017. Okay, so what would I actually do if I need to get the sales for 2018? I could actually write the same formula except that I would refer to the table TBL 2018 instead of TBL 2017, right? So if I actually copy this formula, and let's actually insert another text box here to make the comparison on, to illustrate on. So I'm going to insert a text box here and I'm going to color it like a sticky note here. And let's paste this formula here. So this is the formula for 2017, as you can see here. If I need to write the formula for 2018, I would just change TBL 2017 to TBL 2018 on each reference here. So TBL 2017, I would change it to TBL 2018. So this formula at the bottom here would give me the sales for 2018. So as you can see here, the difference between the two formulas is just this part here, TBL 2017 or TBL 2018. This is the only difference between these two formulas. But actually, I can make this part dynamic and I can make it change based on the year that I selected using the indirect function. Okay, so we can actually make this TBL 2018 or 2017, we can make that part of the formula dynamic by putting it in a cell and making this cell have this value dynamically change based on our choice here of 2017 or 2018. And the indirect function can help us do that. So let's see how we can do it. So to help us with that, we can have a cell contain the table reference. So as you can see here, we've got a cell here, which is cell L15, contains the table reference TBL 2017, and it looks it up using a VLOOKUP against this table here using the year. So if we select the year 2017, it gives us TBL 2017, and if we select 2018, it gives us TBL 2018. It's just a VLOOKUP. So we can actually change this part of the formula here, TBL 2017, and make it refer to the cell with the help of the indirect function. So if we change that to indirect, and I would refer to this cell, cell L15, and I would absolute that as well. And remember, guys, when we said that the reference given to indirect should be a text. So this text here, TBL 2018 or TBL 2017, needs to be concatenated onto sales amount as a text as well, right? Because Excel will not understand that we need to construct a text this way. So we actually need to concatenate that onto sales amount with square brackets here, which is basically the name of the column, inside double quotes. And this is how we can create a reference that is a text. And we will do the same here with the other references as well. So this one will be indirect, this one L15, and we would absolute that, and we're going to concatenate that onto year with square brackets, which is the reference to the column, inside double quotes, and would close our indirect function. So now we're giving indirect a reference as a text here, TBL 2018 or 2017, concatenated onto sales amount, which would construct the reference for the column, sales amount in TBL 2018 or 2017, and then here as well, we would construct the reference as a text for the column year in TBL 2018 or 2017, depending on the value of the cell L15, and we would do it again here as well for the product name column. So indirect, and I'm gonna select cell L15 here, and I'm gonna concatenate that onto product name as a text here inside square brackets, and then I'll wrap it in double quotes and close the brackets here for the indirect function. And if I press enter, you can see here I'm starting to get different values, and these are the values for the sales in 2018 for products 1, 2, and 3. So let's check here. In 2018, for product 1 is 375,635. If I go to sales 2018, and then I would highlight the cells here for product 1, you can see here 375,635. Okay, so let's actually recap again on what we've done. We've basically constructed a text reference using the value in this cell, L15, and also using the column reference as a text. So we concatenated the two text values to construct a reference. We basically molded them together. We glued them together. We glued two parts. The first part is the name of the table, TBL 2018 or 2017, and the second part we glued to it is the reference to the column. And these are both texts. So you glued a text to a text using our glue here, and our glue is the ampersand, which is the concatenation sign in Excel. This is how you can concatenate or glue two texts together using the ampersand. And now, as you can see here, the reference to the table has become dynamic after we've made that change to the formula. So when we select 2017, we get the results for 2017. And when we select 2018, we get the results for 2018. Now, let's speak about referencing sheets. So how do sheet references look like? Well, we can actually check that ourselves. So we can try to refer to a sheet and see how the sheet reference looks like. So I've got two sheets here, my sheet and my sheet. One of them is without spaces on the name and the other one is having a space on its name. And let's first of all check how the sheet reference looks like for the my sheet without a space. So we can refer to a cell inside that sheet. So I'm going to write equals and then go to my sheet without a space. I'm going to refer to cell G15 here, which says this is my sheet without a space. And let's see how the sheet reference looks like. So as you can see here, it's the sheet name and then an exclamation mark and then the cell reference, which is G15. Now, let's see how the sheet reference looks like here in case of my sheet with a space. So I'm going to write equals and then go to the sheet, my sheet with a space here, and then select cell G15 as well, which says this is my sheet with a space. And let's check how the reference looks here. And as you can see here, the reference is the name of the sheet inside single quotes. And you have it inside single quotes because the sheet's name contains a space. And this is actually the generic sheet reference, which is having it inside single quotes. This is the generic way for writing a sheet reference, and it would work whether a sheet's name has spaces or not. So you should actually write the sheet reference this way. So this is how you write a sheet reference, basically. The sheet's name between single quotes and then an exclamation mark, and then you can start referring to your cells. So I just wanted to show you the difference here between the two sheet references, because if you do it this way, the sheet's name, and if you put a space, if the sheet's name has a space, and if you don't wrap the sheet's name inside single quotes, you will get an error. This will not be a correct reference. So I can actually have this sheet's name be dynamic. So I've got a drop down menu here, and then it has my sheet without spaces and it has my sheet with a space. And I can construct an indirect formula that can get me the value in cell G15 dynamically, depending on whether I select my sheet with a space here from this drop-down menu or my sheet without a space. So let's do that with the indirect formula. So equals indirect, and then the reference here, the address I'm going to give it, is basically the sheet's name inside single quotes. So I need to actually construct a single quote here between double quotes, right? Because a single quote is a text. So I'm going to wrap it here inside double quotes, and then I'm going to concatenate that onto the sheet's name. I'm going to absolute that as well. And then I'm going to concatenate that onto a single quote as well. And I can also concatenate that onto an exclamation mark, right? Because we need to have an exclamation mark as well. And then I can also concatenate that onto the cell reference, right? And the cell reference, I can give it as a text as well, which is G15. I can put it inside double quotes and close my brackets here and press enter. As you can see here, it gives me this is my sheet without a space when I have my sheet without a space selected here in the cell. And then if I change that, you can see here it's going to be this is my sheet with a space. So here we've created a dynamic sheet reference using the indirect function. As you can see here, we glued together the different parts using the ampersand, as you can see here. So we glued together different texts here to construct the reference, and the reference is dynamic because part of the whole reference is actually what's inside cell N20, which is a dynamic value because it gets changed by the drop-down menu. So this is how you can use the indirect function with sheet references. Now, let's see how we can refer to other workbooks. So how do references to other workbooks look like? Well, we can know that if we can refer to a cell in another workbook. So I've got another workbook open here, which is called Other Workbook, and this is on my desktop. And basically, I'm just going to write a simple formula here equals a cell in this other workbook, which is cell K7 here. And it's going to say this is the other workbook. And let's check the reference here and how it looks like. As you can see here, the reference to another workbook is basically the name of the workbook, including its extension inside square brackets, and then the name of the sheet as well that we're referring to. And then all that is inside single quotes, and then an exclamation mark, and then the cell reference. So we can actually replace this other workbook.xlsx with a cell reference, which is basically the cell containing other workbook.xlsx here. So equals indirect, we're going to put that inside indirect, and we need to construct a text reference, remember that. So we're going to put the first part here, which is the single quote and then the opening square bracket inside a pair of double quotes. And then we're going to remove this other workbook.xlsx part. We're going to concatenate basically the single quote and the square bracket. We're going to concatenate that onto the value of the cell K26 here, which contains other workbook.xlsx. And we're going to concatenate that onto the closing square bracket, and then the rest of the formula actually, which is closing square bracket, sheet 1, and then exclamation mark, and then the cell reference. We're going to make the rest of the formula here as a text, and then we're going to close parentheses here for the indirect function. And if we press enter, you can see here we get the same value. This is the other workbook. Now, this part here of referencing workbooks and using indirect with workbook references, you're not going to use it a lot because there are not lots of scenarios where you can use it, because the other workbook has to be open in order for you to be able to retrieve a value from the other workbook. So as you can see here, currently we're able to retrieve the value, which is this is the other workbook. But if I go to this other workbook here and I close it, let's save it, we still have the value here. But if I recalculate here, if I do any kind of recalculation, so if I enter a number in a cell or do anything that would cause a recalculation, you can see here I get a ref error. So you're not going to be able to retrieve a value unless the workbook is open. Okay, so just bear that in mind. You're not going to be able to retrieve a value unless the workbook is open, and there is not a whole lot of scenarios where you can use workbook references with the indirect function. One more thing about the indirect function is that it's a volatile function. So if you use it a lot on your spreadsheet, you could have some slowdowns because it gets recalculated every time you enter any new value in a cell or do anything that would trigger a calculation on your workbook. So just bear that in mind and don't overdose on it. Okay guys, so that's it for the indirect function. And let me note guys that the indirect function is not a very easy function to get the hang of, so you'll need to practice using it a lot to be able to get the hang of it. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. If you found this video helpful, press the like button, subscribe to the channel for more videos, and share it with your friends. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments section below. You can download the example workbook and more free resources through the links below in the description. Also, please check my Excel courses, links below as well. Thanks for watching, I'll see you on the next one.